we have been hearing about the bombshell whistleblowers that the Republicans were going to bring forward. And this comes in different forms. One of them got lost. We talked about the big informant who was supposed to expose Joe Biden's corruption and the bribery scheme and all this. And they had all the evidence, and then the Republicans misplaced them. And then also, we heard a lot about whistleblowers from the GOP when it came to the weaponization subcommittee in the House, who is supposed to be making the case that the FBI, the federal government, in this case specifically the FBI, is being weaponized against conservatives. And I want to give you a taste of the quality of these whistleblowers. They're not technically whistleblowers, but that's what they're calling themselves, and that's what the GOP is calling them. And I guess this is what we should have expected, this absurd of quality when it comes to their whistleblowers, but it actually shocked me because we'll get into it. Both clips, but first a quick piece here from Politico. Allen, one of the whistleblowers, allegedly failed to provide relevant information. So this information comes from a letter that the FBI sent to this committee to explain why these two of the whistleblowers that are being brought forward, why they had their security clearance taken away. It wasn't because they're being persecuted for being conservative. It's because Allen allegedly failed to provide relevant information as part of an investigation into individuals who were accused of engaging in criminal behavior in the Capitol on January 6. Allen also, according to the FBI review, expressed sympathy for persons or organizations that advocate, threaten, or use force or violence, or use any other illegal or unconstitutional means in an effort to prevent federal government personnel from performing their official duties. And then one of the other guys, meanwhile, a friend, according to that same letter, espoused an alternative narrative about the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, while describing to superiors why he would not participate in a search and arrest. He also, according to the letter, recorded a meeting with his superiors and took part in an unapproved interview with a Russian government news agency. His security clearance was revoked on May 16th. So, Josiah... We're hearing the GOP out on this, right? Jim Jordan was supposed to bring forward these bombshell testimonies, and then we're supposed to feel bad that individuals, or we're supposed to see it as the FBI being weaponized against conservatives because these guys lost their security clearance for not doing their job. In the case of a friend, I think it was his last name, he refused to participate in a search and arrest because of his views on January 6th. If you're not going to do your job, you shouldn't have the job.
Yeah, the whole situation is kind of bizarre because if you watch the full weaponization subcommittee hearing, and I watched most of it, basically the three witnesses who are whistleblowers, right, even though, again, that status is contested to say the least, they basically make a case that as U.S. citizens, they're entitled to First Amendment protections, which is true, and that that they're entitled, rather, to FBI employment while exercising those First Amendment constitutional rights, even if they're sympathizing with insurrectionists. And the reality is this: you are entitled to your First Amendment protections, which is why these gentlemen have not been arrested, right? But you are not entitled to employment for any law enforcement agency, let alone the premier law enforcement agency of the United States. So if during the course of your duties, you do things like express repeated sympathy for a group that invaded the U.S. Capitol, threatened to hang the Vice President of the United States, and tried to overthrow the government to install an unelected dictator as tyrant of the United States, you may lose your job at the FBI. You may have your security clearance revoked. That shouldn't be particularly controversial. This is an example of where certain conservatives and certain Republicans, they really struggle with this. Your right to free speech does not entitle you to protection from the consequences. So This is simply an example of the FBI just, following the natural consequences of you potentially being a security threat to the organization you work for. So
before we discuss further, a lot more to discuss on this. This is Democratic Representative Connolly walking through what a third whistleblower had written on Twitter about January 6th. This is George Hill's tweets. Take a look at this.
Can't speak to his claims. I do have the view that going out and, again, the idea, attacking someone saying you haven't yet been given the magic wand of whistleblower status, I believe that's inappropriate. I'm not familiar with all of the substance of his personnel actions.
Well, might it cause you some concern? Let me show some tweets on the screen. from Mr. Hill. This one, he had theories about January 6th that it was instigated by the deep state, not by insurrectionists who were up to no good seeking to hang the vice president, Republican vice president, I might add, of the United States, or other depredations. It was the deep state that led to this. Are you familiar with that tweet?
No.
Here's another one. Are you familiar with this tweet, in which he talked again that the deep state is real on the January 6th insurrection?
Just to be clear, I'm not familiar with any of his tweets. We just believe that it can be helpful for people to have counsel, and we were willing to assist in that way.
I say again, it just doesn't seem that controversial to, as a federal agency that's supposed to be enforcing the law, not love the idea of someone who believes in the deep state coordinating an attack on the Capitol to what? I never understand that conspiracy theory. To make MAGA look bad or to whatever. I've tried to have at rallies Trump supporters explain to me, okay, so the Democratic Party actually, with Pelosi coordinated with the deep state to make January 6th happen, make it look like Trump supporters to prevent the certification of Biden's election. Wait, what? Why would they want to do that? And why would the FBI want to have someone who's supportive of those conspiracy theories about that attack on the Capitol in their ranks?
They wouldn't. And again, it's what we just talked about earlier. The fact of the matter is, whether or not these three witnesses realize it, they each made an affirmative case for why they should have been fired, or at the bare minimum suspended, but perhaps just fired wholesale, let alone having their security clearance revoked. So often conservatives try to make the case that, listen, when the FBI or when law enforcement agencies crack down on us for certain extremist belief, it's because we're conservative. It's actually, no, it's because you're extremist. Yes, you are a conservative extremist, but it's the extremism that's getting you, in trouble. If you were simply sharing memes about wanting to cut taxes for the rich or, a robust defense budget, those are conservative beliefs, conservative parts of conservative ideology that you would not suffer any consequences for at the FBI. But when you express sympathy for, again, a group that invaded the United States Capitol to try to kill or hurt members of Congress and the vice president of the United States because he wouldn't overturn an election, you have gone beyond the pale of just conservative beliefs, which, again, there's a wide range there, into the unacceptable. And the FBI is not obligated to keep you on payroll.
100%. Another moment here from this hearing. The Democrats just did a great job of making the case for why all of this whistleblower nonsense is just not what the GOP is hyping it up to be at all. And this is Democratic Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
You also claim that your top secret security clearance was improperly revoked, yet an independent investigation concluded that you demonstrated a number of security concerns, which included that you refused to execute a court-ordered arrest warrant and when you downloaded documents from intelligence systems to an unauthorized removable flash drive. The cherry on top could be your unauthorized recording of executive management, which I'm sure you know violates Florida law, along with your unsanctioned interviews with Sputnik News established by the Russian government in 2014 and fully owned by the Kremlin and Putin's cronies.
Time of the gentleman
I think
has
it's
expired.
clear who is weaponizing government.
Gentleman
I yield
from
back.
the gentleman.
So true. Before we discuss any further, just one more moment I want to look at. This is Democratic Representative Stacey Plaskett, also making a very accurate case here.
Here we are on Police Week, watching House Republicans jump to lay the foundation to defund law enforcement. My colleagues on the far right are on a mission to attack, discredit, and ultimately dismantle the FBI. This is defund the police on steroids. As part of their mission, my colleagues have brought in these former agents, men who lost their security clearances because they were a threat to our national security, who, out of malice or ignorance or both, have put partisan agenda above the oath they swore to serve this country and protect its national security.
that's the other part of this. For how long were we told as the left that you are going to defund the police? You want to defund the police, because of a pretty small portion of the left that wanted to do that. And that was something the right freaked out about constantly. But see, in the case of defund the police, at least it was in response to an actual real problem. And then they were putting forward what I saw and see as an incorrect policy solution. Here, they're inventing this problem, and then the solution is defund federal law enforcement, defund the police. What they were so against for so long, are now pro defund the police because of a made up story about a weaponized FBI.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just underscores the hypocrisy, and the Republican Party's superpower. Actually, they have a few. They have a few advantages in the modern political landscape. Certainly not popularity. It's certainly not a record of governance, right? Democrats are the better governing party. They are generally the more popular party with more popular policies. But one of the things that enables Republicans to win as often as they do is the shamelessness of their hypocrisy. They are not held to account by one another or very often their constituents. So you look at the situation with defund the police. It is true that during the 2020 George Floyd protests, there was a vocal element of the population and within the ranks of the Democratic Party, very, very few, who were calling for police agencies to be defunded or in some cases even abolished. But the first things first, those sentiments were infinitely more understandable coming from progressives and members of the community who were just fed up because they witnessed the unarmed or the murder of an unarmed black man, right, which happens unfortunately too often in this country. That's an infinitely more sympathetic and understandable sentiment than conservatives and Republicans wanting to defund the police simply because those police agencies are doing their job and cracking down on extremists who just so happen to be very often conservative. Number one. Number two, the fact of the matter is you have to look, when you look at like extremist elements within a movement, social movement or a political movement, they're going to be there in one form or another, right? You can't have any mass social or political movement on any scale. Look at the civil rights movement. It had its extremists. You can't have an extremist-free movement. The question is, to what extent does that extremist element animate the movement? And to what extent is it represented in the leadership?
Yes.
Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they were not calling for defunding the police or abolishing the police or anything like that. So it didn't really have a presence in the Democratic Party's leadership. Whereas this brand of extremism from the right, it is riddled in the GOP's leadership. You have Jim Jordan, you have Donald Trump and people in Donald Trump's orbit calling for the dismantling of the FBI and the ATF and other things as well. It's a huge asymmetry here. They are not comparable.
100%. And this is something you and I talk about or complain about a lot. There are so many in our current political environment who actually do get bought into the idea that, okay, the right's bad, but I saw some of these videos of annoying people who say that they're on the left, so kind of that's both bad. And while, yes, there are dumb people, there are extreme people on both sides all the time, of course, as you were saying, you must look at how does that manifest itself to positions of power. How many Democratic lawmakers believe the things that you take issue with about the left? How many Republican lawmakers, in comparison, hold views that are so radical? And that's why in this moment, breaking news, we talk a lot about the radical right wing because it is driving the GOP right now. I call it the engine of the GOP because of how it drives the agenda and the actions of the party. And those views, those extremist views, are absolutely showing up in positions of power. An example is all the people we talk about on a daily basis, whether it be Marjorie Greene, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, etc. But even I covered recently Trump calling into, who is likely going to be the nominee of one of the two major parties for the presidential ticket, he called into a QAnon event. I don't think it was labeled technically as a QAnon event, but people were getting up there espousing those exact views, and he called into it, associating himself with those people. So that is why the far right is the significant threat and the danger that we talk about on a daily basis that it is.
Yeah, it's just fundamentally dishonest of anybody to suggest that simply because a problem is technically present on two sides of an issue, that problem is equally present, right? That it's an equal number and an equal threat. It's unfortunately it's a lazy thought. It's a lazy sentiment often expressed by people who know better but want to pretend otherwise because they have an agenda, or people who, for whatever reason, just don't have the time, effort, energy, or interest to dig deeper. It's just, oh, well, both sides. The fact of the matter is, whether people like it or not, if you're taking an honest reflection of American contemporary politics, the extremism that we're talking about is much, much more prevalent on the right than the left. And I will also conclude by saying this. When we're talking about politicians and defunding the police, it occurs to me that when President Biden was inaugurated, his first major piece of legislation was the American Rescue Plan, which was the third round of COVID stimulus relief. That passed on a sheer partisan line. Only Democrats voted for it. And in that COVID stimulus relief bill was ample funding to law enforcement agencies across the country. So it was Democrats who voted to fund the police, state, local, and federal police, made that available to the police. And it was Republicans, every single Republican in the House of Representatives and the Congress, who voted against it. So when it comes time to actually voting, not just saying things on Twitter, like you said, but when it comes time to actually putting your money where your mouth is, it's Democrats who back the police and Republicans who do not.
Thank you so much for watching this video. For the outro, I want to quickly plug Josiah's channel. Hit them with it, Josiah.
All right, folks, you can find me at youtube.com/@Pondering Politics, one word. If you like progressive politics, if you like the Republican Party being called out, and if you like collaborations with Luke Beasley, hit me up there.